afternoon, everybody. My name is Angela Kirby, and I want to welcome you to this session. I wanted to, I think probably many of you were in the morning session, but I just wanted to acknowledge both Paula and Kathy, who this past weekend really kind of worked with us to provide these presentations based on the feedback that folks gave us on the survey that we used to solicit information from folks. So we hope that this continues to be, that this will continue to be a partnership, and that we as a patent system are able to provide more explicit supports to physical therapists and occupational therapists across Pennsylvania in collaboration, obviously, with your professional organizations. So I just want to thank them so much. Literally, they've been working on these presentations up until, you know, this after, probably today, but at least getting the information to us and everything since yesterday. So just thank you, thank you, thank you. And you're in great hands. I wanted to just turn it over to them and just acknowledge and thank them. So please make sure to do that also for us on behalf of the whole patent system. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. So for those of you who are not in the morning session, I'm Paula McNamara, and I've been practicing for 15 years, primarily in school-based and community mental health. I'm currently the Vice President of POTA and practice in low-income school district. I am also a part of the POTA school-based task force that we started just over a year ago to really look at practice guidelines for the state of Pennsylvania for occupational therapists, since there currently are none. And I'll let Kathy introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Kathy Coltis, and I've been a physical therapist for about 25 years now. And I have my board specialist certification in pediatric physical therapy. I work primarily at this point in time in school-based system, as well as doing some birth to 3 early intervention and a little bit of outpatient. And I have presented on various topics at the different pediatric physical therapy sessions, and I look forward to a chance to share some information that we have stumbled upon with virtual physical therapy.
So just quickly, I want to give a disclaimer that during this presentation, we're really looking at providing you practices that we found helpful and useful during this transition to virtual education. That we know that every school district is going to be a little bit different depending on what model. Some school districts are doing a hybrid model as the school year starts, some are all virtual. There's many different forms of education that school districts are looking at. So we encourage you to work with your school district and kind of figuring out what that might look like. That we are also aware, as I talked about earlier today, that there's some information regarding virtual therapy services, but the research is limited to a more ideal population. So what we've really done is to take some of that information and use it the best we can in this environment that we're required to provide virtual services to a larger population. And then we are also not providing any legal advice on what is or is not allowed to be done. And we would encourage you to consult with your state associations, looking at your practice acts, discussing with your districts and LEAs if you have any questions regarding legality on how to provide services. And Kathy, it's you.
So what we hope to address over the course of the next little while is basically, what is virtual and occupational physical therapy looking like these days? It's definitely reimagining service provision while adhering to safety guidelines. We want to talk about some consideration for service provision options. We're going to talk a lot about collaboration in virtual therapies. And again, reiterating what Paula suggested, we are just based off of our own experiences, suggesting some best practices. And we also would just touch upon some consideration of some FERPA and HIPAA regulations. So in talking about the service delivery, what do I mean by considerations and service delivery? With the virtual component of therapies, we have a whole new set of issues we need to consider in providing the best care for our kiddos. When you're looking at trying to get online with someone, you have to consider some language barriers or cultural implications that are going to present themselves in this alternative educational model. We need to make sure that student and family resources and items present, and what's present for them, and can they be safely utilized. And really take a close look at what delivery models are available to us as the therapists, and what is most appropriate to meet the needs in our current least restrictive environment, which for almost everybody is their home. We're going to be considering synchronous versus asynchronous posting, sending home activities via email, and again, all of this kind of surrounding what can we do to meet their needs. What IEP goals can we address? We're going to have to recognize this, particularly in my experience in some of my physical therapy goals, there are goals that cannot be addressed at home while maintaining safe environment. And we definitely will want to discuss that with the family and the whole team, actually. And then what interventions are appropriate given the current situation? Can the intervention be provided safely? And again, I'll go to a physical therapy situation, you know, balance activities, gait training. These are things that we work on in schools that it's going to be really tough to maintain a safe environment at home.
And before we keep going, if you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. At the end, we'll try to go through all the questions. We're hoping to have some time at the end to have that time to answer questions, because I think some of it too is problem solving, what to do and how to do it. As we've kind of worked, as this next slide really talking about collaboration during virtual education, that's something that in brick or mortar school, Kathy and I do often anyways. I service 3 schools. Kathy services all of the schools in our district, and we are very rarely at the same school at the same time. So luckily we already have the relationship that we are talking almost daily, even brick and mortar school or now virtual with the virtual education as well. But we want to keep kind of having that dialogue of, and we encourage you guys to do that as well, is to have that dialogue to really support each other, because it's new for everybody. So how can you really support it? So for us, really looking at that collaborative model, what does it do for us? It increases the consistency with families and students. So there's different students that Kathy and I see that that for what she sees in a virtual session might be something different than I see, or looking at positioning or that expectation. And so really collaborating within that. We have a student who we both see that some of it is getting the parent to sign them on and kind of having that consistency. But then also talking about how she should be sitting. She's a student who uses lost stand crutches. And so what does that look, and Kathy, I don't know if you want to talk more about it too, but really looking at seating, positioning to support her physical needs, but also how does that support her occupational therapy goals and her occupational therapy needs as well.
And basically, kind of piggybacking on that, basically the situation where you come online and they look one way. Oh, she's perfectly positioned in this wonderful chair, because they do know that physical therapy is looking at how they're positioned. They have their braces on. And then while in an occupational therapy session, Paula might jump on and say, hey, she was laying on her belly on a bed, or she was, you know, kind of sitting in a way that I know you don't want her to sit, while she was leaning over on the floor trying to do the occupational therapy task. So I wouldn't know that that's what she's doing at home unless Paula were to, you know, basically loop me in, so then I can follow up with the family. So just to kind of try and bring it a little bit more home for people. That's the type of collaboration, particularly in this setting, we're so used to doing with our teachers or with our other therapists. That happens naturally, that now we really have to make sure we reach out to each other and make sure this is happening.
And the students who we work with, like this one particular student, she knows that I will go tell Kathy. It's like, I'm going to tell Miss Kathy, I'm going to let her know that this is what's going on, so that she knows that we're also in communication, because then that also increases the consistency of her actually doing what we're asking her to do. There's also one thing that we found virtually too, is that some kids just have a really hard challenge in engaging. There's a life skills kiddo who we worked with. who Kathy and I both see, and virtually she would shut down. When the screen went on, she would shut down, she would hide, she would go under blankets. When her mom was there, sometimes she would participate some, but many times that the e-helper was a grandmother who didn't have the same skill and really encouraging the student. So I had many conversations with mom about how can we re-engage this kid. So we talked a lot about what things she liked. And so I was able to, she liked Vampirina. So I talked with mom. I was like, okay, so let's let her know that if she can do these couple things, then I'll show a YouTube video of Vampirina and I think I showed it for like 30 seconds. And then Kathy also has that knowledge too, because then again, we can keep getting these kids to engage, because for some kids, it's just strange and it's weird and it's unknown. But if we can kind of tie into some of that motivation and then work collaboratively to kind of figure out what that motivation is, and I think that's a piece of it too, then we can help support the student across the board, not just during one session. Do you want to take the next one?
Sure. So formal collaboration with teachers, counselors, other related service providers, it's so important, and it's so easy to do when we're all together in the same building. And it's a piece that virtually we can't forget. We do have to continue to operate as a team, and everyone's kind of in uncharted territory when we are putting forward our ideas of how these kids are working online. So I do try and make it a point at least once in a while to reach out to various team members and just say, hey, how can I support you? And sometimes that helps too, because you know, in this virtual world, particularly for physical therapy, we are so limited in what we can do with the kids that if there's something that somebody else is struggling with that we can help out with, that really gives us a great way to, again, increase participation in school, which is ultimately our goal. And another thing is the communication with outside healthcare providers, vendors, etc. A lot of us in schools, while, you know, maybe aren't the primary brace people who take care of braces and various orthotics, we're still responsible for helping to make sure that they fit and for guiding the family when, you know, maybe it's time to look at new ones. And online, it's very important to check in with whoever is helping out the kids and saying, hey, you know, how's that brace working out? Are the crutches still fitting okay? Because our view and our vantage point from a computer screen isn't always great. And again, we have to go back to coaching models, you know, of consultation and recommendation of specific equipment strategies and approaches where it's appropriate to the families. And, you know, sometimes your consultation might be, hey, you know what, I think that the doctor needs to get an eye on this and let's see what's going on. So again, this is ways that, you know, we have to remember the basics, I guess, even though it's in such a different mode of therapy, I guess I'll call it.
And there's times too that there's students who I see who during a session, they complain about a brace or that kind of thing too. And that's where that collaboration goes in too, because for parents, for a lot of our parents, they're very overwhelmed. And so whoever they can get on the computer or whoever they can get in a virtual session or text or that kind of thing too, sometimes that's who they tell. And they don't really think about, well, which adult am I actually supposed to tell this to? There's a whole lot of people that they now have to interact with and engage with in a different level than they ever did before. And so rather than saying, oh, that's not my thing, I was like, hey, Kathy, this kid's having a problem with the brace. Next time I see them, do you want me to say something? Do you want to follow up? That kind of thing too. How can we connect this? And something that Kathy and I often do too is because she actually contracts with our district. And so I had mentioned this morning that our district has given us all Google Voice phone numbers. And so I can easily text with the parents through the Google Voice. And so they'll call me, they'll leave a message, that kind of thing too. So they have an easier access to me than they do to Kathy, which is fine, because then I can just shoot Kathy a text message or an email and say, hey, this is what's going on. And then she can follow up with the parent too, whether it's an email or a phone call or that kind of thing too, that there's just different roles, but really our ultimate goal is to support these students the best they can within this new environment where they're learning and where they're participating. So one thing that there's many reasons. Kathy and I did some in this spring, we did some co-treating together, but this summer we really took on that idea of co-treating during extended school year. That one thing that we found in the spring is that the parents are managing a lot. They have to manage a Google Classroom, and within our district, they use Google Classroom, but then for the therapy sessions that we use Zoom. And so it's a little bit confusing about what goes where, what time, that kind of thing too. And so during extended school year, specifically, we approached it as if we can get all the parents on for one session with the kid, and we can just extend that time, we can really co-treat. And so we actually co-treated with the speech therapist as well. So the three of us kind of worked together really to support the students in actually accessing those treatment sessions and not making it confusing or overwhelming, because we really found that sometimes the parents, especially some of our parents, are like, I can't do technology, I can't figure it out. But if we can get them on one time a week, then we can all at least do something to support them in a different way. We also found that it was easier to kind of bounce off of each other to keep the kids engaged in a different way too. So I would do something, and then Kathy would do something, and then the speech therapist, all on the same theme, but we kind of work together in that collaboration and that co-treating of, okay, what can we do? How can we kind of approach this to keep the kids engaged? And we actually would have one or two kids in a group together doing these sessions. And then that also helped us with the collaboration too, and knowing what the other practitioners are doing. That it made it a little bit more, fun to an extent, because it was kind of watching and kind of that dynamic process of all three of us kind of adding to what's going on. And then Kathy, I'll let you do the last one, because that happened often.
And just kind of, I'm not sure of the group that is in this session right now. I don't know how many of you have experience doing the virtual sessions versus people who are doing it for the first time. But for anyone who has been trying to engage a child for 30 minutes on a Zoom, sometimes I can tell you as a physical therapist, I feel a little bit more like a circus clown, because I'm trying to keep their attention. I'm trying to make sure we are doing something positive towards the IEP goals, and I'm making sure that the child doesn't accidentally hit the leave meeting button. So what this allows us to do is kind of play off of each other a little bit more, and it really did seem to engage the kiddos. It definitely, when they were doing a physical activity, they were much more into it, knowing that, the next thing they were going to do was going to build on it. So the ability for the other adults in the session sometimes would be able to do the model of the activity that I'm trying to get the child to do. So they see how to do it correctly, and it's not me doing it. And then when they're trying to do it, I can sit there and I can give them feedback for, what they are doing or what they're not doing. And I'm not down trying to do a squat myself. So again, and as a physical therapy kind of angle to that, it really did provide a lot of feedback for me that I think added to the sessions. So.
Good. And I think sometimes too, for myself and for Kathy, that when you're really trying to model something, it's then hard to pay attention to what's going on, because you only have so much bandwidth to kind of look at. If I'm doing an activity and I'm sitting there modeling what we're doing right in front of the screen, then I can't focus on what's going on. But Kathy can do that and can be that additional eye to see how the kid's doing something, or I can stand back. And do stuff so that Kathy can, rather than being further away from the screen so a kid can see what she's doing, she can see a lot closer and be able to kind of watch a little bit closer as to what's going on. And then there's also students who we worked with that the modeling was a great motivator for them, that Kathy would put up, okay, we're gonna do this exercise, and some of them wouldn't do it until I started doing it. That when they could tell me to do it and I started doing it, then they started doing it. And some of it too is just kind of that, where we've shifted what it is and how do you engage socially in some of that, because for a lot of these kids, they want some of that social interaction. So if they can kind of encourage somebody else that they have to do it, then okay, we'll negotiate this, I do it and you do it too. And that back and forth piece of it just adds another dynamic. It makes the virtual a little bit more dynamic, I guess is the best way to say it.
And I want to reiterate something that Paula said a little bit earlier. I do see your questions popping up, and definitely we're going to get to them. Okay. We're going to try and go through, we don't have that many slides. We're going to try and go through the slides first, and then we will circle back. I believe you're all putting them in the chat. So we should be able to pull up that chat and start to address them. So I just wanted to please don't hesitate to shoot those questions in there.
So we wanted to give you kind of an idea of some of what we did in Cotreating this summer. I had mentioned earlier today that one thing I learned very quickly is that the students who I work with did not have any supplies. I mean, Kathy was on a session in the spring where we asked the parent if she had scissors to work on something, and the mom brought out fingernail cutting scissors with the little pointed end, and we're like, we're not going to worry about cutting. So in learning what families had at home for equipment or for supplies, we decided that we were going to kind of come up with a theme for each week. I came up with an activity for each, an activity that kind of related to the theme. And then Kathy and the speech therapist you work with would kind of play off that as well. So two of the examples of what we did, and so I made packets for all of my students, mailed them home. So these are two of the examples of what we did. One week we did a beach and ocean theme. Another week of the 5 weeks we did kind of cows and animals. So oftentimes the way that the session would run is that we would come on, kind of talk about whatever the theme was. Sometimes we would do a short video. The speech therapist would ask some questions about it. And then I would pull up the supplies that the students needed to find. So for the beach ball, I'd pull up, you need the paper plate that has all these lines. You need the square that has the circle to cut out. You need the tissue paper. And so they would get that. And then Kathy would introduce some activity to do. So I don't know if you want to give an example, the beach theme.
Yeah, just to, kind of toss out a couple of things. I'm sure, the gross motor kind of activities that we can share on screen might be some of the yoga activities, or ocean animal imitations was a real popular one. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about some examples and references a little bit later, but some summer quick match games, anything to tie it back to the theme. And again, anything I could share on my screen, really, they tended to like to see it, especially when we tried to link it to something that was meaningful. Like it was a steaming hot day, the day we did the beach and ocean theme. So that really worked out well.
Well, and then so Kathy oftentimes would put a choice of a couple of different activities. So then the kid, so working on with the speech therapist with some of those goals, that the kid would have to request what they wanted and which of the two activities they wanted. But we would often kind of do a little bit of the fine motor, whether it was okay, we're going to cut a circle, we're going to take a break, we're going to move, and then we're going to come back. And so that kept the kids engaged, because sitting there and doing step by step of an activity can be challenging for these kids to stay engaged in the same way. Another week we did the cow, which was actually, I think, one of my favorite weeks of the summer, because they just all loved it. And a lot of these kids also just love animals in general. So again, it was the same thing, that I took out everything, they figured it out. Some of the challenge was getting the Ehelpers not to do everything, but I think that's across the board, is that some of it is providing that feedback to let them try to do it. And so in different ways, really trying to encourage that, because I think the kids know at school, the kids often know that we expect them to do most of it themselves, but at home, sometimes they see what they can get away with, or the parents don't realize how much they can do, or the older sibling don't realize how much they can do.
One of the things I just want to kind of toss out there, because I do see quite a few questions, and again, like I said, we will go back to it, but I do want to just say one thing about the whole concept of co-treating, and as you're hearing this, even if you can't physically be online at the same time, but you could collaborate with your speech and your OT to come up with a theme of the week. And even if in your individual session time that you are kind of building upon each other, it does, because there were times I couldn't fit my schedule together with speech and OT. So, if they were working on a group activity, then I would kind of say, hey, you remember you did this? And hey, we're going to do this. Just so I did want to toss that out there, and we'll get more into it later, but I at least wanted to acknowledge the fact that I don't want you to think that this is all just if you're sitting in the same Zoom session or Google Meet session. It's just, again, it's something that hopefully you guys can draw a little bit away from and take home with you to add to your bag of tricks.
Yeah, and I mean, and co-treating can look many different ways too. That, as Kathy said, that during the spring, would touch base with the special ed teacher for the life skills classroom to know what they were talking about, or I would jump into she would do, I had a time that I could jump into her live Google Meet classroom. And so I could go in there and listen to what they were doing and kind of share different ideas, or the speech therapist would jump in. That if time allowed for those different things, that teachers would invite me so I can jump in a little bit to kind of see what's going on, see what they're talking about, and then try to really make things a lot more consistent across the board in a very often feeling disconnected space. Back to you, Kathy.
So I wanted to talk a little bit more specifically. I know this a little earlier today, you had a little bit more surrounding the virtual occupational therapy. So I asked Paula if it would be okay if we kind of did a little bit more on the physical therapy side of things. But I think a lot of this kind of falls under both OT and PT. I've been practicing for a long time, and I can tell you that, we're definitely better as a team. And, a lot of our practice acts are similar in, the basics. And I think that one of the things that kind of can go without saying, but I wanted to bring it out, is that virtual PT continues to fall under the code of ethics and is shaped by a couple of principles. And you'll see on the screen there at the bottom right, it tells you where my resource is, and it is on, I have it at the very end on references as well. But I really, really want to make sure that I give the acknowledgement of this to this wonderful paper that Dr. Johnson and Dr. Wiley put together for the American Physical Therapy Academy of Pediatric Physical Therapy website. I use that as a base to jump off of, I'll say. And basically they have some great information on that. So I do have the reference at the end of the slides, and I definitely recommend everybody, even if you're an OT, I think you can draw some good information out of it. But basically some of the principles we need to remember: school-based PT is still an ICF focused, participation driven model. And our main goal is to support progress in the educational setting. And that we advocate for meaningful participation of all students in the school community. And this can get really lost because you lose your school community. You lose it, as a therapist in the school, and they certainly lose it as the student. And they don't see what their other peers are doing. So it increases our challenge that much more to make sure that they understand why we're doing what we're doing. And it's to make them more able to participate in all aspects of school, even if it is virtual. PTs must work collaboratively with all members of the school community. Again, this is what Paula and I have been speaking about. And while we are evidence-based practitioners, and I think Paula had touched this morning also on the fact that there's not much evidence-based practice out there for us right now on virtual. But we still need to use outcome measures and data to document student success. How's this different online? Well, I know for myself, I can't use a lot of the data points that I was using when I was physically present with the children. So there are different types of things. I'll use an example of something that I purchased on an online website, which is called Win It in a Minute. It gives you an activity. How many times can the kiddo complete the activity in 60 seconds. So I'll use the example of jumping up and down. Well, what I found I was doing was I would have the child jump up and down for 60 seconds. I'd see how long that was, and then how many they could complete rather. And then next month I did the same thing. And for me, I was able to at least feel as though I was getting a little measure of the endurance to physical activity, which again is so important in participation. Now that obviously is a very high level example, but it gives you an idea kind of some of the things. Some of it is just arm circles, or there's a lot of different things. But again, we need to look differently at how we're measuring. And I failed to mention this earlier, and I think it's so important to point out, communication is key here. There are going to be differences, and we need to communicate not only with our school team, our LEA, but with the families. And I will say that, I do work across a couple of different school districts, and the families are much more receptive to changes when they understand why they're occurring. And obviously we all have the same goal of keeping the kids safe, so they can understand why I'm not going to push them on some of the balance things that I want to see happening if I were there with them. So we're going to change up this goal a little bit, and we're going to focus on this aspect of it. So communication, I can't say it enough, is key, particularly in this virtual world. So
to jump in that I found it interesting, and I mean, and there's the benefit of this too, is that I think we're in dialogue a lot more with the parents now than we were before. And so there's the, you know, there's a lot of struggle, there's a lot of frustration, and it's not every parent, but I think there's a lot more communication and collaboration that's going on. Like Kathy has a student who she's been working on using the crutches more for walking. And there was one day that mom got so excited. And so she sent both of us a video of her daughter walking. And I don't know that she would have done that had the kid been receiving school-based therapy, but because these are things that we continue to work on, and we would talk about different things in the collaborative session, and mom would talk to me about it before, that for mom, she's so proud of her daughter for walking as much as she can, that I think that interface with the parent, hopefully that will continue as we at some point shift back into the brick and mortar world, is that there could be kind of a different collaboration with parents now than we've ever had before.
And kind of piggybacking on that as well is the fact that it is important to acknowledge the priorities of the family. And I found this particularly important in the spring when we were first trying to figure out what this was going to look like. I had a lot of parents really look at me on my Zoom meeting with them and say to me, I can't do the physical right now. I need to focus on getting this kiddo in front of a Zoom screen and doing their work, their schoolwork. I'd appreciate it if you would give me some activities I could do with them at other times. And, you know, if it could be anything from, okay, well, let's increase the amount of time this kiddo's walking. You know, okay, I would like you to chart for me, you know, the amount of time or the amount of, you know, the amount of motivation the child needs to get up from the couch and walk to the table for dinner versus, you know, if you weren't there. So you have to acknowledge the fact that while we are related services and very important, we need to also find out what's going to work best for the families and support them in their needs. And finally, just again, to recognize that, you know, one of our main goals as school-based PTs is promote awareness of the movement, fitness, function, and physical activity needed to access their school environment and meaningfully participate in it. And there are so many ways that we can virtually give examples and set them up with different activities that will help them to at least maintain, if not improve, movement, fitness, and function during this time. Again, just going into some suggestions, and that's, I reiterate again, these are just suggestions. This is not, you know, anything unfortunately related to any research that has been done. But again, we must determine the appropriateness for each individual student and ascertain the student family's ability to access the service. And this I cannot state enough. If safety cannot be established, telehealth is not an option. And I think what happens here for me, my own personal experience was that the Ehelper was not physically able to ensure the child's safety. Then I can't go on and give them suggestions of what to do. So again, this is again where communication is key, documentation is key. I made sure to keep the people, the special ed supervisor, the teacher, everybody kind of in the loop and say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do instead. And I would document every communication, every email I sent home to the parent. And I would also document that they were communicating with me or that they didn't communicate at all and I never heard from them again, which unfortunately did also happen. And really, again, this is probably more for people who haven't done virtual before, but the very first visit with the student and family should be more of an orientation visit. You want to review the plan that you have. Hey, I'm going to work with this kiddo. I'm going to have them moving around. I need to make sure that, you know, their space, if they use adaptive equipment, it's there and someone is there to keep them safe. Create an emergency plan was an interesting thing that was brought up. because I do have kids who have seizure disorders, and I need to know that they know what to do if anything goes south. And these are things that we don't necessarily always have on the top of our brains when you're in a brick and mortar building, because there's people there, there's people right there. There is no worse feeling than looking into a computer screen and not being able to do anything. I had a kiddo who, she was an older kiddo who had a seizure disorder. She, thank God, did not have a seizure, but she was standing and her knee went out. So she kind of went down. Now, she did have a nurse there. That was her Ehelper. But again, it's such a helpless feeling to be on the other side of the computer screen and seeing that happen and not being able to do anything about it. But we had already discussed the fact that I wasn't going to have the child stand if the nurse wasn't right there. So again, I set myself up that I at least knew we did what we needed to do to keep her safe. And definitely knowing the expectations for the individual that is the Ehelper is extremely important. And also not walking away from the session, which is very important.
Mm-hmm. And we had talked about some of that too, but I think just that these are things that to kind of reiterate too, because I think they are very key in what we're asking parents and the Ehelpers to do, especially for the younger students and the students with more complex needs. And one thing, Kathy, that I wanted to add too is that with that initial visit within our life skills classroom, we actually called as a team. That we had a Zoom call with the special ed teacher, the speech therapist, Kathy, and myself, and we called as a team. So again, we could make sure that everybody was on that same page, and it was that collaboration and talking to the parent and saying, hey, what can you do right now? What's the situation? What do you need help with? Because then we all kind of hear from the same thing and about what the parents' priorities are, as Kathy mentioned, and then also looking at that time and that flexibility of what their schedule looks like. How many kids are they trying to balance? Are they working? Are they not? And oftentimes in the spring, especially, and I've got a feeling it'll keep happening, is that some of our parents were not working and then they started working and things shifted a little bit. So where does that collaboration and communication amongst the school staff, but also with the parent in that communication really support everybody in a very fluid environment.
And then finally, I wanted to just kind of point out a couple of FERPA and HIPAA considerations. Again, I know you're getting kind of hammered with this statement, but it's not meant to be a legal recommendation. And this is only to serve treating therapists with points of consideration. Just remember, any materials shared into the learning management systems require privacy protections under FERPA. So that kind of falls under the don't leave your laptop open kind of situation that we're all very familiar with as healthcare providers anyway. Confidentiality and privacy must be considered in any written submissions, any videos or photos shared online as protected educational records. Paula had mentioned that, you know, parents get excited and they want to share things with you. Just be careful, because you would hate for, you know, that to then, you know, come out and the parent have a different idea of why, you know, well, why did you keep that video? Well, okay, we need to just be aware that this is video shared and it's a protected educational record. And then also kind of more, again, this was also something that was brought out in the document that I mentioned before. In March, the Department of Health and Human Services did issue a statement regarding good faith provision of healthcare services during the COVID-19 nationwide public health emergency. And within that, they kind of gave a little bit of a relaxation of some of their standards, I guess I'll say. One was that they indicated that providers using certain video platforms would be exempted from penalties during the pandemic. And again, we've already talked about Google Classrooms and Zoom, as long as the necessary privacy settings were on. Now, I wanted to just point out, and again, most people in this room probably already know this, but anything that is considered a public-facing platform like TikTok or Facebook Live, they remain prohibited for all therapy uses. But most important, again, comes under the guise of communication. Please consult your LEA with your questions regarding your students' records and privacy. If something's happening and you're not comfortable, go to your LEA and say, I am not comfortable with this and this is why. And remember that if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. somebody said that to me once, and nothing is truer. You must document any conversations you have, just so that you know that what you're doing, you have kind of done your due diligence in making sure it's within the policies and procedures of your school district, because as we know, they are all different.
And I was gonna, there was a thought, it'll come back to me. And so here's different resources. And from this morning, we've provided a bunch of resources that Leslie and I use. So more OT resources, but these are resources that Kathy has that are a little bit more PT focused. However, I'm sure that they would be beneficial to OTs as well. So I don't know.
Yes, and again, I do highly recommend that first article there. I did link the actual website too. The screen, so hopefully you'll be able to see that. But again, as Paula mentioned, I am working here. I'm not a school district employee, so I do get the question of, well, who's paying for all of this? Well, for me, I mentioned before, I've been a PT for 25 years. I feel like I had every game and everything I needed. This was the first year in a long time that I felt like my treatment bag was empty. So I did go out online and I did make some small purchases of different things you can share online. And again, I'm hardly a Zoom expert, but you learn how to do the different PowerPoint games, and you learn how to do the share the screens and how to give the kids access so they can play fitness tic-tac-toe with you. And again, it is worth your time and energy to develop a virtual bag of tricks. And these are just some of the sites that I have utilized and found very, very useful. And again, like I said, none of it is terribly expensive, but they all have really good information.
And I'm sure that there's a question in there. I did check, and they'll be posting the PowerPoints on the Schoolology afterwards. So we can go through some of the questions. The slides. There's a comment. When can I collaborate with another service? We can go back and forth to keep an. Oh, sorry. When I collaborate, I don't know if that's a question or just a statement. I think it's more of a statement. Sorry. Do people do virtual PT when parents are not present? I have liability concerns regarding that. Kathy.
So I think this comes a little bit down to how your district gets parents to agree to participate online. I think there is some, every district is a little different, but I do believe that there has to be some agreement that someone is there monitoring. I will say that as a PT, if I go online and there is no adult present, it changes things quite a bit. I do not have the kids get up and do anything. We might, do some chair yoga. We might do some things like that, but I am painfully aware of whether there is an adult present that can serve as the safety monitor, for lack of a better way of putting it.
And again, and I had mentioned in the earlier session too, that if you're in a situation where this stuff is happening, talk to the special ed supervisor, the principal at the school, that kind of thing too, because they can also follow up and say, this is really, in order to receive these services, we really need to reiterate the safety, which means that there needs to be an adult there to make sure that people are safe. But again, it becomes that communication, because it is different. It's a different way of parents needing to be the support or having somebody there to be the support than has had to happen when we were in brick and mortar.
I see there's another question there about documenting Cotreating sessions, and the way that this one particular district does it is when you do submit, we do an online type of documentation, and it does allow you to say that it was a therapy session and these were the therapies that were allowed. I think there is a tremendous lack of consistency across districts. and you would have to go directly to whoever your supervisor is. And, you know, what we did is we made the case for it. They were not thrilled with the concept of co-treating at first. And when we talked about basically what we talked about with you guys earlier, they came to understand that they were getting a better product when, in some situations, when we actually did co-treat. And the way we document it is the way you would document, you know, a brick and mortar situation, what you did, what goals were addressed, and any data you collect.
And along with that question, another part of that question was how does this work with meeting the goals of the child's IEP? So I planned in that session what I was doing to work with that child's IEP, and Kathy did too. And we just went back and forth. So we didn't do the same activity, but it was more of a co-treating and kind of balancing off of each other, having them do one thing. And then Kathy does something more towards the PT goals. And then I go back towards the OT goal. And then the speech therapist does something with the speech therapy goal, that we all still know the goals that these students are working on. And we kind of pull different activities in to work towards those goals in this one session.
And when I look down into the questions and it says about access, and yes, access has their own set of rules. And again, this is where unfortunately we have to defer to whatever they're telling us that we can and cannot do. So it may be very unfortunate that in some situations co-treating is not an option, and that's where you might want to look to the more well, treating along the same theme but at different times.
And again, as Kathy said, and Kathy knows more than I do, that every district did things a little bit different and shifting. And so it really is based on what that looks like. And Leslie and I talked about it too, that for the school district Leslie works for, they were up and running virtually within 2 weeks. Because we are a low income school district, we had to wait until we could get technology out to kids. So we were a little bit more delayed in that. So it's really working underneath the parameters of what your school district is saying. But also talking to them about, so is there a way that this could be done? Does that mean that you have to change the IEP? And maybe that's what it is too. Do you shift the IEP so to really support how services are going to be provided virtually, whether it's the shifting goals in an IEP or shifting a NORAP, that those are conversations that you can have with your districts about what that might look like. And
I see a question too that is near and dear to my heart. How do you coordinate all of the schedules with service in different schools? And it is definitely a test of patience. What I have tried to do is be as open to differences in this. So the way the fall semester is going to be looking in my districts is they're going to want me to try and fit into the blocks that they have designated for related services. And I pretty much came out very early in the game and said, well, I will do my best, but you know, we need to be aware of the fact that, you know, you have people who will go to one building and stay there all day, and then you have people who need to jump into 3 different buildings or 4 different buildings in a day. And again, communication, I think, is key with that, is coordinating the schedules. And it took a lot of creative scheduling in the fall, in the spring, but we were able to kind of get it together. So I would hope that the spring will work out the same. Yeah, and again, quickly, just because I saw another kind of more PT related question regarding walking in a gait trainer. So what I have done with the goals that I am not able to assess is I put in my progress summary a very clear statement as directed by my district that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the goal was not able to be monitored accurately or safely. And then what I do is I put in there what I did document. So for you know, a kiddo that I couldn't get to do a gait goal or a balance goal or a time goal, which is the ones that I have because I have them time doing certain activities. I basically said, so instead, here's what we're doing now. And this is the baseline now. That worked in my district. I can't guarantee you that your district will feel the same, but it's something at least to try.
There's a question that somebody asked. Do you find that Ehelpers tend to take over more with asynchronous models of treatment as opposed to synchronous models. And for me, for as many as my kids that I did, I actually did synchronous. And so I watch them take over. I don't know what happens when we don't see what's going on. But I think kind of going back to what Leslie and I talked about too this morning is really before starting sessions, to really talk to the e-helper about what you need, and what you would like them to do and what you don't like, what you would like them to allow like the student to do too. I mean, there's a session that there's a kid that Kathy and I worked with. Well, we've been working with him for a while, but some weeks his brother was the e-helper, some weeks the mom was. And I think some of it too is that with the mom let him try to do things, the brother did things for him. And so some of that's out of your control, that we would sit there as many times, let him do it in different ways. And the brother just didn't, I think the brother just wanted to help out. And so that you can, even though you can talk about it as much as you want, sometimes there's people who want it to look a certain way or want them to do a certain thing. And so they will kind of take over. But I think some of that, again, goes to communication. I don't know if you have any thoughts about the asynchronous, Kathy.
So for the asynchronous, I see a couple of questions. How do you document it? And also, does it count towards IEP minutes? So after many discussions with many different people, what most of the people I work with decided was asynchronous was going to look a lot like consultation. So if the IEP minutes were 30 minutes of direct PT services, and I could not, or I made the judgment that that was not going to be a safe call, or the family decided that they didn't feel like they were capable of doing it, I talked to the case manager, and we did a revision to the NUREP, and we changed it to be 30 minutes of consultative physical therapy services. And what I would do is I would send emails weekly with activities, and I would expect a dialogue. And I was very clear with the parents. This is a dialogue. This isn't me just sending. I need to be receiving as well. So that whole concept of consultation was, very team-based. And I would reach out to the teachers and any other staff that was working with the child and say, hey, how can I help? What can I do? I jumped into a couple of other people's Zoom meetings just to say hello and make sure that the kid didn't have any questions about anything, or if the e-helper was there, if they had any questions for me. So that's a little kind of glimpse into how the asynchronous was working for me. I did not post activities in a Google Classroom, like a video or anything like that for the kids to do. I'm too nervous about the ramifications of safety. Even the kids that are my much higher level kids, if they jump wrong, as we all know, kids, are silly. I just didn't feel like I could keep I couldn't keep it safe if I wasn't there with my own eyes seeing what was going on. So I hope that helps out a little bit as far as the asynchronous.
So we still have some more minutes. I don't know if other people either have questions about kind of what we presented on, what Leslie and I presented on this morning, or just kind of different thoughts or suggestions as to what's worked, what you found worked. That even if you have things that you found that works, we can also read those too within the chat.
I know it's a little early, Paula and Kathy, but if no one else has any questions, I can go ahead and open the breakout rooms now so that people can have some of that small group discussion if they want. Everyone is automatically assigned to a breakout room. So if you get in there, and especially Paula and Kathy, you guys can just come back to the main room, and then anyone who does have specific questions or maybe wants a little bit of a smaller audience, they can come back to the main room as well to ask you guys questions. We'll be in there for about 10 minutes, and then
before you open up the breakout rooms, there is another question that somebody.
Okay, perfect.
How about sharing YouTube videos as a PT? Would you feel better if you just shared links?
Yes, I actually did that. I shared links and I sent it only to a parent email. I was not sending it to any student email because in our district, all the students have their own Gmail accounts. Any link that I sent was sent to a parent, and it was sent with the disclaimer of, this is a movement video. Please be there when the child is performing. I think they'll really enjoy it. So that's how I felt like I was in a little better control of sharing something with a video like that. And that's exactly what I did. I would share YouTube, Go Noodles, that type of thing. I felt like, you know, because I was communicating directly with the parent, I was kind of giving it over to the parent to say, tag your it.
Somebody just asked about posting a link onto the Schoology. What link are you looking for? They're gonna post this PowerPoint. So if you're looking for something else, just let us know. And I know that there were some challenges within our school district initially because the technology department had blocked a lot of things, YouTube being one of them. And so there is, and I don't know off the top of my head what it is, but you can search for it. But there's a way to put like a safe YouTube link that you can do. What is it? Or it's a safe filter. So you can also use that. I'm sure that you can search for it if you don't know it. But depending on if it's a personal device or if it's a school device, there might be issues with that as well. The exercise link on Schoology, Kathy. So if you've got a link, we can just put it on the PowerPoint too. If you've got an exercise link.
No, what I mean is, does Kathy feel comfortable putting the Schoology link for her exercises, putting it on Schoology for people to access, or does she only email it to people?
I see. No, I only email it to people, and that is a great question. And the reason is because I don't want the kids to jump on it and try and do it on their own without the adult supervision. So that's my personal preference. And again, that is just my personal preference. If your school's comfortable with you doing it, I don't see, you know, a reason why you couldn't with certain kids that, you know, you're relatively sure could be safe doing it.
I think that's it, Amy, if you want to.
Okay.